Thank you very much for having me here. A little bit about myself. I love to talk about myself. No, I'm just kidding. So I have been talking about grasses professionally for 44 years, and I've been in the seed business for 34 years. So I've been doing it a while. And I grew up in southeastern Colorado on an irrigated beet farm, and then I went to CSU, got an animal science degree, worked for the SCS, and then I got in the seed business. So I've been in the seed business 34 years, and then I bought Pawnee Buttes Seed and named it that after our lovely Pawnee National Grasslands. We want to talk about native seed, and you know why native seed, and of course most of us know that their natives are very adaptable, logical, right? But they're great. They reduce soil erosion, conserves water, and increases soil health. But why native seed? They're adapted to the locale, of course, and they're going to save you money and time, right? And they're very drought tolerant. So I got to tell you that when I got in the seed business 34 years ago, people would say, do you have something that looks like Kentucky bluegrass and uses about 10% of the water? And at first I'd try to answer that question, and then I finally got to the point where I'm going, you know what, I just got to tell you, no, there's no such thing like that. And it's interesting because I was born and raised in Colorado, but there's been a lot of people that have moved from, right, California or New York, and you have to explain that it's dry here, and that blue Grama is not going to look like Kentucky blue. The other thing I like about natives, it's great for natural habitat, especially if you plant grasses and wildflowers, right? You got bees, and you got birds, and you got all that good stuff. So how do you pick the right seed or pick the right species? So I'm going to show you this. It's a little small. You probably have to put your glasses on and look at it in yours. But the state, the NRCS does a good job of dividing up the state into what they call major land resource areas. So if you look at that kind of tan colored one, and that is like from Colorado Springs, it goes east to about Los Animas, and then that line comes from Los Animas down to about Trinidad. That's a 7 to 11 inch precip zone. So there's things that we can do here that they can't do there. It's just pretty dry. So for example, if you're familiar with farming here up here in this area, we got dryland farming and we got irrigated farming. It's so dry there, they don't dryland farm. They tried to at one time, and they had a lot of erosion problems because it's just too dry. 7 to 11 inches of mean annual precip. You can't grow winter wheat every other year like we can up here at 14 inches. So just 3 inches, it makes a difference. But that's 7 to 11 inches of precip. And here it's 14 inches. So there's years, well, I'll tell you a little story. My brother and his wife bought a 6,000 acre ranch about in 2000, and the first year they got 18 inches, second year they got 1.5 inches, third year they got 3, and the fourth year they got 14. Add that up, divide it by 4, and I think it comes out to 7. So so there's a lot of grassland there, or it's irrigated, but it's not dry land farming. So it's good to understand, you know, where you're going to be working at. Let's see here. I press that button and it ain't going anywhere. Oh, there you go. So that's that brown area. I think that's 69 on it. But look at that red area. That's the San Luis Valley, and that's 4 to 7 inches. That's their mean annual precip. And it is so dry there, for them to try and do a dry land grass seeding, it's not very successful. So it's good to know where you're at. And even up here in Weld County, like you get up there, Briggsdale, there's a little pocket. They only get about 12 inches of precip. You get up to Grover, and it almost goes up to 16. So, and every inch of when your mean annual precip changes by 1 inch, it makes a big difference on what you can grow and the profit if you're a dry land farmer. So you got to know where you're at, what your precip is, and so how do you pick the species that are going to grow, in a certain area? So they call them ecological site descriptions. So if you were to imagine like around Yuma and Akron, there's some real sandy areas out there, and that's what this is, where they call it sandy plains. There's actually 3 different ecological sites out there. One of them is sandy plains, the other one is deep sands, and another one is choppy sands. And it makes a difference in your soil type, even though your precip's the same. The sandy plains is it's a little heavier, and so you can drive a pickup on it and not get stuck. The deep sands is really good, and they can grow grasses, native grasses like switchgrass, sand blue stem, yellow Indian grass, and prairie sandreed that can get 6 foot tall. Right out there. But that's about a 16-inch precip, and it's very sandy. So why can something, and then you can go like across the river at a 16-inch precip and be in loamy clay soil, and it won't grow those species. And the reason is because when you got real sandy soil, the intake rate is much higher. So if you get a 3-inch rain, all of it goes in. If you get a 3-inch rain in an hour, all of it goes in. But if you get a 3-inch rain on clay, most of it's going to run off if you 3 inches in 1 hour. So out there in nature, what'll grow depends on the soil type and the mean annual precip. And so that's how you start selecting what species you're gonna try to use or want to use. Yeah, you can go to that website to get more information. So what is ecological site description? Is that physiographic features, meaning like steepness of slope, things like that. That makes a difference on how something will grow. So out in eastern Colorado, if you have country that's real breaky, like gravel breaks, shale breaks, limestone breaks, then there's 2 species that like to grow on there, little blue stem and side oats Grama. And just because of the kind of the aspect and the shape. Of course, climate features, we talked about that, the amount of water you get, water features, yeah, all right, and soil features, so we talked about all that. So what I did, when I worked for the SCS, I learned about soils, I learned about plants, a lot of these things that I'm telling you about, and so I designed a mix called a low-grow mix, and it's a native. These are using native species. So like Idaho fescue is native in our mountains. Sandberg bluegrass, native in our mountains. And Rocky Mountain fescue, native in our mountains. And big bluegrass, that's also native in our mountains. But at this elevation with a little water, they can survive. They don't exist here naturally, but if you water them a little bit, they can survive. So these are all cool season species. That means they can grow from about March 1st to December 1st, and they wouldn't need much water to keep them green. So they can be green that whole period of time with a little bit of water. They're not going to survive without irrigation. Our native prairie mix, on the other hand, that one has blue Grama. Blue Grama's native range is from Old Mexico all the way into Canada. So all the Great Plains states have blue grama growing. And so it's a very adaptable, drought-tolerant species. It's a warm season grass, so is buffalo grass. And side oats grama, that's a warm season. But we put in western wheatgrass, which is a cool season. And all of these are native to eastern Colorado. If we didn't farm right here, if we didn't have all these houses, that's what would be growing right here. Green needlegrass is also another native, and it's cool season. Sand dropseed is another native. The old timers called that go-back grass because after the Dust Bowl days, that was one of the first species that would come back and start holding the soil. In 1976, I worked in Sterling, and you could actually, and I used aerial photos, right, to work with ranchers and farmers, and you could actually see 40 acres within 160 acres. You could see this 40 acres that they had to plow out, and you could still see sand dropseed and another grass called Threon, red Threon. You could still see those growing in 1976, 40 years after the Dust Bowl. Wow. So that's how adaptable they are. But the other thing was that blue grama, buffalo grass, and western wheat, they were hardly coming in yet. So it takes nature a long time to heal a wound like that. And you can still go out there. My wife and I have ridden out there on the Pawnee National Grasslands. You can still see sand dropseed. You can still see areas that I know were farmed back in the 30s, and they're still recovering. So here's a foothills mix. One year, just coincidentally, I got a call from somebody that lived at Horsetooth. Then I got another call from somebody that lived right outside of Lyons. And then I got another call from somebody that lived west of Denver on the way to Evergreen. So all of that was in the foothills. And so I identified a bunch of grasses that grew there naturally. And here are the grasses. Switchgrass. So the foothills is where the plains meet the mountains. It's a transition zone. So some of the grasses that grow out on the plains will grow in the foothills, and some of the grasses that grow in the mountains will grow in the foothills. It's a transition area. So Rocky Mountain fescue, you can find that in the foothill area. And big blue stem. And that big blue stem can get this tall. You know, and back east it can even get taller. Slender wheatgrass, that grows in the mountains. It'll grow sometimes along a river at lower elevations, but it doesn't grow on an upland site. You know, it won't grow in the middle of the Pawnee National Grasslands. Thick spike wheatgrass, it's very drought tolerant, and actually we find a little of that on sandy range sites in eastern Colorado. But for the most part, when you're talking about a native wheatgrass out here in east of the foothills, it's western wheatgrass. So yellow Indian grass is another grass. That's the one that'll grow 6 foot tall out there in the sand. It'll grow 6 foot tall in the foothills in the right situation. Blue grama, we talked about that. Blue grama gets about, out there in nature, about 1.5 feet with a seed head. The seed head is 1.5 feet. The plant itself is maybe 8 inches, something like that, 10 inches. Beardless wheatgrass, that's another, it's a bunch grass, it's a cool season grass that grows in the foothills. Indian rice grass, another native that grows in the foothills. Little blue stem is another native that you can find it in eastern Colorado, but more in those break areas, gravel breaks, shale breaks, those kind of areas. Sand dropseed, I told you about that one. Side oats grama is on the CRP acres. Have you all heard about what CRP is all about? You know, they've got a program called the Conservation Reserve Program, and it came about in '86. The government wanted to take 40 million acres of cropland out of production and put it into native cover. Native cover being grasses, forbs, and shrubs. And the reason I mention that is side oats, Grama, and western wheat were the two grasses that established the quickest and the best out there on that CRP ground. So native lawn, it's a mix that we designed. It's real simple. It's got blue grama and buffalo grass. And the reason we put the blue grama is that blue grama and buffalo look, to most people, they look identical. And today we had a class from Denver, CU Denver, come by, and one of the questions was, well, can you show us a few ways how to identify grasses? So I picked up a leaf on the blue grama and I picked up a leaf on the buffalo, and they look very much alike, except the buffalo is very fuzzy, has all kinds of fuzz on it. So, so you put two grasses that look together, so one doesn't stand out, right? But the blue grama comes in faster. You know, a lot of people complain about buffalo. It just takes too long to get it established. But the blue grama kind of comes in as a cover crop, but it's way better than a cover crop or nurse crop because it's going to stay there. It's not going away. But the buffalo spreads, and you know, spreads with those stolons, those runners, and so it'll fill in real well. So one of the things that's starting to happen, 34 years ago when I moved to this part of the state and started working with homeowners and parks, people were concerned about water, and you know, we've all lived with water restrictions. Well, the situation is getting a little bit more dire, right? So 10 years ago when we had the bad drought in Colorado, the city of Colorado Springs went through a lot of work to convert their parks, in some cases, some of their golf courses, the rough areas on the golf courses, they converted a lot of that grass, the Kentucky bluegrass, to more drought tolerant natives. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that. The gentleman's name was Eric Becker, and Eric and I worked on designing some mixes. But some of the things you have to consider is your irrigation. So one of the first things they did is they looked at their irrigation system and tried to redesign them if they had to or if they could to make them better. Sometimes they put in a new pump. If you're talking about irrigating 80 acres, right, you got a big pump. And if your pump isn't efficient, then you can waste a lot of water that way. But you need to adjust your watering needs for the new seed. That makes sense. I mean, if you're going to plant something that's drought tolerant, you don't want to keep watering it the same way you've been watering the Kentucky Blue. And the other thing you need to consider is soil. So we had kind of talked about that a little earlier, but depending on the soil, you may want to use different species. You know, you may not plant the same species all the time, regardless of the soil. Be sure your soil is compatible with your chosen native seed. So he's talking about sandy, loamy, silty, clay. Makes a big difference. A clay soil is way more drier than a sand, just in general, because it doesn't take the water in. And we have a lot of rains, right? Where we'll have a 2-inch rain that'll come down in half an hour. And so it's going to run off. Topography, of course, makes a big difference. And in some cities, you know, most of our cities here along the Front Range they're not flat as a pancake. You know, you got some ups and downs. And so if the steeper the ground, the less effective your rain is going to be, right? You're going to have more runoff. So 14 inches on a lot that's fairly flat right across the street, if it's kind of steep, then it's not the same. The effectiveness of that 14 inches is just not the same. So be conscious of slope and face of area to be converted. While up in the mountains, it makes a huge difference. If you're on a north-facing slope, it's always wetter. And it's not because it's getting more moisture, it's because it's on the shady side of the mountain, and so you got less evaporation. So how much rain you get is one factor, but how much evaporation you get is another factor. And so up in the mountains, the south-facing slopes are always drier, and even the vegetation changes dramatically. The existing vegetation, you want to think about what you have and what you want to get rid of and what you want to replace it with. And don't forget that if you got trees in your landscape, right now you're going to put blue grama, and now your plan is, I'm not going to water the blue grama anymore, and those trees are within that, and now you're not going to water them. Well, of course, they might die. So you may have to put drip irrigation on your trees because you're going to water your turf a lot less now. So how do you convert Kentucky bluegrass to something native? I've been telling people for 44 years, you cannot interseed the grass that you want into a grass that you don't want and expect that the grass that you do want to overtake the grass that you don't want. Now that is, you can write that in stone, okay? It don't work. And you could try me out, you know, but I'm not kidding you, it don't work. So sometimes people have a pasture and they're going, yeah, this stuff doesn't produce that much. I want to plant a grass that'll produce a lot more. What can I do? And I say, plow it, disc it, start all over again. I don't want to do that. Well, then you're going to end up having what you got. And because what is there has got a root system that might be 2 foot deep, and now you plant this new seed in there, and a little baby plant comes up and says, get out of my way, because I'm gonna grow now and you have to die. Well, that's never gonna happen, right? It's not gonna happen. And so if somebody tells you that, don't matter what their degree is, they don't know what they're talking about. So how do we remove unwanted grasses? So I don't want you to leave here thinking, oh yeah, I can plant what I want into something I don't want, and it's going to take over. It won't happen. But here's what we do. So we initiate when the vegetation is actively growing. This is what we want to do. And this is May through August. So you're going to try to kill your Kentucky bluegrass. That's what you're going to do, right? You're not going to plow it, disc it. You're not going to cut it out with a sod cutter. You're going to kill it. And what's the best way to kill it? Well, we want to mow it as short as possible, and then we want to water it so it's really actively growing well. And then we irrigate the area so it's growing well. And then this ensures rapid growth in preparation of the next step, and that's going to be your killer, the glyphosate, okay, Roundup. But that Roundup, I'm telling you, it won't work if you don't have healthy grass. And I think one of the mistakes people are going to make is they're not going to get this grass growing real good. But you got to grow this grass. You can't tell it, you're going to kill it. You got to water it, you got to fertilize it, you got to make it really look good. And when it's really looking good, bam, you hit it with Roundup. Then what else do you do? Well, second application after 10 to 14 days. So you're going to water it again, and then you're going to spray it, and then you're going to hit it with Roundup again. And wait till you go on to this next one. Additional applications if necessary. It may take 4 or 5 sprayings to kill it, you know. So, but if the 2 applications usually will work, but it's got to be growing good. You can't spray Roundup on a dormant plant and expect for it to kill it. It won't do it. What activates, or how Roundup works, is it's got to be green and growing. If it's green and growing and you spray it with Roundup, it can kill shrubs, trees, flowers, grass, anything that's green and growing, but it's got to be actively growing. so it'll take that chemical in. So it says may take 4 to 5 weeks for a total kill. Well, we're working with an HOA right now in Fort Collins that is doing exactly this. And actually they seeded it today. So we'll keep going to see what the rest of the story is. So you want to aerate it after you've sprayed it and theoretically killed it. Then you aerate it. And it says use a hollow tine core aerator. You want to take 2 to 3 inch plugs out, minimum of 3 passes. So you're going to aerate it 3 times. And what I've seen from Eric's presentations is when you're done aerating it, you don't see it. I mean, essentially it looks like nothing but dirt. That aerator is so aggressive, it's like really ripping it up a lot. And then you broadcast. It says broadcast or drill. What Eric likes to do is broadcast seed first. And he likes to do that, late July, early August. But like I was telling you, this HOA is doing it right now. They're seeding right now. And you want to drill at a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch deep. So broadcast seeding is having a little whirlybird thing and throwing it out there, right? But drill seeding is having a piece of equipment that can actually make a slit in the ground, drop the seed a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch, and then cover that seed. You get a lot better take on your grass if you do it that way. Matter of fact, on that CRP program, the government would not allow broadcast seeding. They had to drill seed, with an acceptable drill. They call it a drill. Okay, it's not one of those drills that makes a hole in the wall. It's a device that just makes a slit in the ground, drops the seed in there, and then covers it up with dirt. Then you want to drag the area with a drag mat, trying to just cover it up a little bit more. Removing unwanted grasses after you aerate, right? Now you fertilize it a little bit. But you don't need a lot of fertilizer in it. And I want to show you the configuration. It's 8-2-0. So when you're talking about fertilizer, it's always N, P, and K. N is nitrogen, P is phosphorus, K is potassium. So they're saying if you get 100 pounds of that product, you're getting 8 pounds of actual nitrogen and 2 pounds of actual phosphorus. So it's very little, not that much. And he said he likes to use a slow release granular. And you're putting down 1/4 to 1/2 pound of N per 1,000. So on a per acre basis, that's 11 to 22 pounds per acre of actual N. Okay, and so you don't need much. So for example, corn farmers, and when they irrigate corn, they'll put 300 pounds of actual nitrogen per acre to produce 300 bushel of corn, just to give you an idea. Or somebody that's trying to grow irrigated Kentucky bluegrass, they might be putting 150 pounds of actual N per acre per year. So this is a very, very low rate. And the thing that's really important about that is if you put too much nitrogen on, that just encourages weeds. So one of the ways to fight weeds is don't encourage them, And so you really don't, if you're going to air, don't even fertilize. You're better off not fertilize than to over-fertilize. Irrigate properly to establish, okay? So we're encouraging you to irrigate it to establish it. And you want to do it 2 times a day for 4 weeks and 2 to 3 times a week at night for 2 weeks. And then 1 time a week at night for 2 weeks. So that means you're going to be irrigating it for 8 weeks, 2 months. And he says then 1 time every other week until end of season. So the point there is that you want it to really get established that first year. And with irrigation, then that's going to encourage good germination and good establishment. So germination is one thing, establishment's a different thing. One of the things that Eric does that scared the heck out of me, because I don't know that much about herbicides. I don't sell them. I didn't really want to get involved that way, but and these are new herbicides, okay? And the thing of it is, the herbicides that we had for a long time are like 2,4-D, and if you read the label on 2,4-D, which is weed be gone, okay? The active ingredient is 2,4-D. When you plant grass, it would tell you to wait till the grass was like in the 2-leaf stage. And then it would tell you what the dosage is. Well, the dosage was so weak that it would not kill weeds, it would just slow the weeds down, right? But if you put just a little too much 2,4-D, you could actually kill that young grass. Or if you got a little too ambitious or impatient and you're doing it a little too early, you could kill the grass. So you had to wait till at least got to the 2-leaf stage. And if it got more mature, that was even better. But Eric has had really good luck using these herbicides. So he said first herbicide treatment in 4 to 6 weeks after you plant it. That's, I've never done that, but he's had good luck doing that, and he uses a product called Confront, and he tells you what rate to use it at, 32 fluid ounces per acre. And Quicksilver's another one, and he's saying 2.1 fluid ounces per acre, you know, and or 4 spot treatments. So how to not plant native? All right. So remember that certain plants, even ones, popular ones like crested wheat, are inclined to take over and could compromise your diversity. I almost think that this is Josephine B. Jones Park, but I can't, it kind of looks like it. So yeah, we've been trying some different things in Josephine B. Jones Park. The crested wheat is not nearly as bad as it has this volunteer rye. It's a cereal rye that volunteered and acts like a bad weed. But don't expect your native grasses to look like this. I actually think I took that picture on Reservoir Road, but I could be wrong, on some buffalo grass there. Or, especially if the grass has not been watered or watered correctly. So this is buffalo grass, and it's getting water on half of it, but the other half's not getting really good water, and so that's what'll happen. It'll be a little brown. Maintaining a converted site. You know, we talked about watering it, talked about weed control. Yes, these are drought tolerant species, but you got to get them established first. And you have an advantage if you can water them. All those CRP acres, they planted at a very light rate. They planted 5 PLS pounds to the acre, which was maybe equivalent to 8 bulk pounds. And we would get stands, but it would take 3 to 5 years to get a stand. And the NRCS would consider it a stand if there was 1 live plant per square yard. Well, that's not, I don't think that's going to be acceptable to you all, right? No. But anyway, and they got better. The stands would get thicker, but they would accept it if they had 1 plant per square yard. So you got to do weed management. So maintaining your new grass, you got to do some weed management. And he says mow grass back 4 to 5 inches, allowing the sunlight penetration. So this is as it's coming up, you know. One of the things that I think a lot of parks wrestle with is they have people that worked in the parks and they got used to maintaining Kentucky bluegrass, That was, so you water it, you fertilize it, and you mow it, right? Water, fertilize, and mow. And if you had a nice lawn, you pretty much have to mow at least once a week, right? Every 7 days. And there's a lot of people that'll mow like every 5. Well, you kind of get used to doing that, being a park employee, and then you plant natives, and you kind of want to do the same thing. And you sure in the heck don't want to readjust your mower for the native. But here's what I'm getting at. These natives do a lot better if you don't mow them at all. So here's the thing. Yeah. So if you got like blue Grama or buffalo, and you constantly mow it, what you're doing is you're opening up that canopy and allowing more evaporation to occur. So if your mean annual precip is 14 inches, but you're always mowing it, you're making it drier than it is, because you're allowing all that to evaporate. So on an open body of water in Flagler, Colorado, it would evaporate 60 inches a year. That's how much evaporation we have. We're dry. We all know that. We're dry. And so our evaporation transpiration rate is very high, right? So it's not just how much you get, how much moisture you get, it's how well you take care of it. So a little bit about dry land farming. They only produce 5 crops in 10 years because of our low precip, but one of the things they do is they keep cover on the ground all the time. It doesn't have to be live cover, it just got to be cover. That way it doesn't evaporate. And so we can take from that knowledge and say, okay, if we want healthy native grass, the fewer times we mow it, more than likely the healthier it's going to be, because you're not losing as much moisture. So we call it, the dry land farmers call it farming their moisture. So how do we make the most effective use of the moisture that we're going to get, right? So that doesn't mean that you can't water. If you want to water it, you can. But if you want to use as little applied water as possible, then how you manage that grass is going to make a big difference, how good it looks. All right, you apply herbicides. In May, Becker recommends using, oh boy, well anyway, Plateau. Amizapic, I think they call that, Plateau, at 6 ounces per acre. And that's another one, and I'm not sure you can just go to any store and buy that, but that's a pretty good herbicide. And then he goes back to using Confront and Quicksilver. Yeah, so all they're saying there is, okay, they are drought tolerant, but for the establishment year, you want to make sure you're giving them enough water. So if we're in a drought and they're not getting any rain, don't expect for them to get established, because they won't. You got to water them up. That's a good question. So the question is, say you plant something and it's dry as a bone, is that grass just going to lay there, dormant until you do get enough rain? And the answer is yes sometimes, and sometimes no. But what I can tell you is that on the Conservation Reserve Program, it started in 1986, and in 1992, I had a friend of mine that actually got his PhD studying the CRP program, and during that 6-year period, this was all of eastern Colorado, during that 6-year period, we had droughts in different parts, and we still had 80% success rate on 2 million acres, planting at that real low rate. So these native species are, they're awesome. I mean, they're so adapted to that, because think of that. I mean, right? You go, these grasses produce a seed head, the seed drops to the ground, and then you go into a 5-year drought. And they somehow get through that. So one of the ways they do it is when they produce seed, when that seed drops to the ground, not all of it is ready to germinate. So the stuff that's not ready to germinate we call that dormant seed. There's a high percent of dormancy in native seed. It's kind of its way of dealing with that kind of a thing. I wanted to show you a picture of this. I got this about 4 days ago. So this gentleman said he heard that I was going to talk here, and he sent me a picture of this. And that's our native lawn mix. And it is that's the one that is a buffalo and blue Grama. Yeah, this is a native prairie mix that when we built our new office in '05, we planted this, I think, in '06. And so it is the one that has, let's see, I think it, yeah, and then here's buffalo lawn in Greeley, and then inland saltgrass on the dog park in Greeley. But that inland saltgrass is awesome. That's got to be one of the best dog parks in Colorado, and I mean it. It is very alkali, that area, and that was growing there, and they decided to make it a dog park. And boy, it hangs in there. That inland saltgrass is a tough grass. I want to go back to that right there, native prairie. I don't know if you can see it, but there's grasses, there's blue Grama, buffalo out there, side oats Grama, but the the western wheat right now is about this tall, and the blue Grama is about like that, and the buffalo is about like that. And so some people might like that, and other people might not like it because they want more uniformity. So if you want more uniformity, you could plant buffalo and blue Grama. But if you like that wavy look, I don't know, I kind of think it's pretty. When we planted that, we planted a bunch of wildflowers in it, and it looked great. But the wildflowers would get about this tall, about waist tall. And, sometimes people would say, hey, maybe you need to mow that. I don't want to mow it. I want to see the flowers, But anyway. So, any questions? So the question is, do you have to mend your soils? It would help. CSU has done a study, and their recommendation is to add 3 cubic yards of compost per 1,000 square feet. And what that does, even if you're growing Kentucky bluegrass, you're going to, for the life of your property, you'll use less water because you got more water holding capacity. And so it takes a lot less water to grow any grass if you add 3 cubic yards of compost. But you got to incorporate it in there, not just put it on the surface. Well, the question is, do you want to add sand to something like clay? So the answer is, I used to work for a landscape contractor in Denver, and people would want to try to change a clay soil to a sand. Well, figure that you're going to have to bring in a semi-load. I mean, it takes a lot of sand to change clay to something besides clay. It's hard to do it. It's very, very hard to do it, unless you brought in topsoil that was more of a sandy type. And I mean a foot of it. Well, that's a lot of material. So it's hard to, and it's easier to learn to work with the soil that you have, but organic matter helps all soil types. Doesn't matter what it is. So organic, that compost is probably going to be your best investment. So the question is there a less harsher way to kill the grass than Roundup? And yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to call this less harsher, but I was going to ask all of you, are you guys master gardeners in here? Anybody master gardener? Right? Well, most of you, though, have planted a vegetable garden. How many planted a vegetable garden in your life? Oh, yeah. All right. Or a flower garden. All right. So, I'm not going to lecture to you, but when you did that, you probably worked up the soil, didn't you? Mm-hmm. You worked it up really good. You got rid of weeds. You made it nice and mellow, and then you planted your tomatoes or your flowers or whatever, because you wanted it to work. And I'm telling you, a lot of times when people are trying to get grass established, they don't do that, and that's exactly what they need to do. So, you know, if you got Kentucky bluegrass, you could rent a sod cutter, cut that sod out, you know, and then till it up with a rototiller, work that up, and prepare a seed bed and start all over again. That would be the way, but otherwise, boy, it's hard to kill grass, especially Kentucky bluegrass with anything else, you know. That's going to be as effective as Roundup. And the thing about it is, you know, I don't know about Roundup's residual. You know, the thing about a lot of chemicals, when you use them, it'll tell you you can't plant grass, you know, after you got to wait two months or something like that. Well, for example, let's say you had a really bad weed problem and you were going to use 2,4-D to spray those weeds. It'll tell you on the label that you got to wait something like 2 months before you plant new grass. Well, that's the advantage of Roundup, is that you can spray and then you can plant your grass the next day. You know, there's no residual to, at least that affects that grass that you planted. And that's a big advantage. So the question is, how do you deal with cheatgrass coming into an existing standard grass? I don't know the name of the chemical, but there is a chemical that you can put down in August, September. And it acts like as a pre-emergent, and it works very good, because try to understand the physiology of cheatgrass. It's an annual, but it's a winter annual. It's like winter wheat. Winter wheat is planted in September. It comes up, and then it goes dormant when it gets cold, and then it starts growing in the spring. Well, that's what cheatgrass does too. So if you put this chemical down, then it prevents that seed from coming up. And it doesn't even come up that fall. And so the next year you hardly have any cheatgrass. So the question is, should we do things in Colorado like those people do in Texas? And the answer is no. No. So managing grass, you know, on your pasture is, there's a lot of different variables. Here's what CSU says, okay, and other land-grant colleges. So if you got irrigated grass and you're able to water it essentially whenever it needs it, right, then you can graze your grass and you can put them back on that grass every 30 days, okay? So you can, ideally that's what you'd want to do, rotate your animals every 30 days. But on dry land, it's 90 days or longer. So you graze it, let it rest for 90 days, then theoretically the grass has come back enough that you can graze it again. But all that depends on how many animals you have and how big the pasture is, right? If you got 1 acre and you got 100 animals, it don't matter what you do, you got way too many. Well, it takes 30 acres of rangeland to run a cow-calf year-round without any supplementation. And a horse, it takes just about 3 or 4 more acres to run one horse year-round on unirrigated grass without supplementation. But if you're going to supplement them, then even though you supplement them, you still got to give that grass rest. You got to take them off that grass. Even if you're feeding them, you could put a semi-load of grass out there or hay, and if they have access to that pasture, they're going to overgraze it. So you got to take them off. That's the only way, you know, and not taking them off, you know, okay, I'm going to take them off 20 hours a day or something like that. I'm only going to let them go out there 4 hours or something like that. They're still going to eat a lot of it. When you have blue Grama and you're trying to grow it as a turf, right? Or you have blue Grama and you don't expect it to be a turf. You're going to have it as cover, and you don't intend to water it a lot. Well, density on any grass. If you don't water it that much, your density is going to be less. So your density goes down with less water. Or if you want to have more density, you water it more. If you want to have, that's like with Kentucky Blue, in order to maintain density, you got to fertilize it and water it. That's how you keep it thick. And if you keep it thick like that, usually keeps a lot of stuff out of there. But Blue Grama being a native, you water it to get it established, and then you start taking the water off at some point. That's why you planted it, right? And maybe your plan is not to water it ever again. Well, it's not going to look like that watered Blue Grama, no matter what. So even though it's native, even though it's drought tolerant, it cannot maintain that density like somebody planting Blue Grama and they're going to water it a little bit, they're going to fertilize it a little bit. It's just the way it works. So out on the prairies, you know, if you look at, and I'm talking about a prairie that has not been overgrazed. Grazing doesn't hurt grass if it's grazed properly. Makes it healthy, actually. But even so, you go out on those prairies and there'll be bare ground, and that's just natural. And you try to. I don't know how many people have asked me over the years, what can I see be in that bare ground? Well, you can see a lot of things, but it ain't going to grow, because what is there is even though it doesn't occupy that exact space, underneath, those roots are usually taking everything, you know, so it's keeping most things out. Most invasive plants and things like that. It's keeping most of them out just because they're competitive. It's taking all the water, and they're very competitive that way. All righty, well, thank you, folks, and good luck. And
Can you tell them where you're located?
Sure, we're at 605 25th Street. I don't know if you all know where Pawnee Nursing Home is. We're just south of there on the same side of the street. And we have that native prairie planted in the front, and I can identify some of the grasses that grow in there for you, so if you want to see that. But feel free to call if you're going to start a project and you have questions. Feel free to call. I've got two young fellows that they know quite a bit, and they're learning a lot. And if they don't know, they're supposed to come to me. But it's kind of fun, you know. But anyhow, we work hard at trying to give good advice to people, and it's not all about selling a bag of seed. It's trying to get the right stuff out on the ground. And I'm totally a believer in trying to conserve the water that we have in this state, you know. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. Thank you very much. I hope you learned something.